sectors collaborate to mobilize resources, what innovative financing mechanisms can be employed to ensure affordable and reliable energy access while promoting sustainability in the face of high demand. I think the High Commissioner in the morning mentioned that there are energy companies from India and South Africa meeting, I think, tomorrow. So it's a good kickoff for that as well. So clearly, our governments are aligned and priorities are aligned as well between the two countries. Arjun, is the stage all set? If I could now invite the speakers on stage, moderated by Mr. Sanjay Joshi, Chairman at the Observer Research Foundation, Dennis Dursi, the Chief Executive Officer of White Roads Investment Company in Albania, Mung Yung Lee, the Policy Analyst at OECD, and Alexander Panhofer, Green Finance Consultant at FinGreen in Austria. So yours is on the left.
Good afternoon. This is a panel on the burning question, financing green transitions in the Global South. And you would find something interesting about this panel. There is no speaker from the Global South on this panel. And the reason is not far to find. The Global South almost staged a walkout at COP29 on Sunday in Azerbaijan. And it was a huge controversy when the 300 billion figure was agreed upon at the end of COP29 for climate finance to start flowing not in 2025, but in 2035. So from 1992, when it was first decided at the UNFCCC for the first time, that developed countries needed to share the burden of climate finance and needed to support green transitions in developing countries. From 1992 to 2009, 17 years it took to lay down a figure as to how much money should be made available. It was a paltry sum, $100 billion. Came 2015, a date was decided, 2020, it will start flowing, but the money never really flowed. And at the Paris Agreement, when the climate deal was really reached, 2025 became the year when they said, okay, you will transition, you will move above that floor and set a goal for yourselves. So that is why the whole question of what should be the contributions became a big issue at Azerbaijan. And ultimately, it was settled in 2035, which is a gap of almost 43 years since it was first laid down the table. So as you can see, the issue has constantly been kicked down the road from time to time. And if that progress continues, probably we can say that the NDCs also could probably not be settled by 2050 to reach that 1.5 degree goal. It could probably be the end of the century. And then we are in disaster zone. So yes, that is why it becomes a burning question. So before we get onto this, Lee, a quick question unto you. What is the issue with climate finance? Why is it not moving? Why is it not moving at the pace and the speed that it should be moving? Lee.
Thank you.
You're in the hot seat.
Yes, indeed, it's a great question to kick off this session. I think we have been asking this question a lot, that why things are moving forward. Just give you some figures before we start a bit of a gloomy picture. I want to start with a bit of positive figures that in the last couple of years, of decades time, we saw how cost competitiveness of solar PV has been made achievement. Now it's most cost competitive renewable energy technologies if you compare it with the fossil fuels. So it's definitely making sense that commercial traction is still there. So that drives us to looking into the global energy investment. In 2023, there's approximately $2.8 trillion has been invested in global energy. And among those, $1.8 trillion has been gone into clean energy investment. although this development and achievement of numbers comparing 10 years ago, it's a big achievement for all of us, there is a big gloomy side. As you flagged that only 20% of those clean energy investment went to South, global South. So then question goes into why all these initiatives and all this announcement and ambitious goals that has been announced by African continent, Asian countries, and many global South has been made, but we are not seeing the progress of closing those financing gap. And I want to direct that question into the areas of cost of financing. Because when we talk to investors or when we talk to DFIs and MDBs, they always talk about when we're designing the projects in renewables, for example, in emerging and developing countries, it is too costly for them. It's because they see the risk around the projects in that specific country context is too high compared to the ones in, for example, in European countries. So that drives up the high perceived risk, and that it resulted in high cost of financing. Just give you context, in European Union, solar PV is costing around 3 to 6%. If you look at dialing into different regions, we see 15 to 20%, even for the solar PV projects that is highly considered as commercially competitive. So that gives you the reason that why, is in some extent, among other challenges, of course, that gives you reason that there's not investment flow going into. And then the simple question goes into then why don't we de-risk it and bring down the cost of financing so make the projects work? But it's not that simple, because we have a bit of misperception that I want to highlight it. Is that if we single out the projects in the emerging and developing countries and compare with the global north, is in fact the project default rate is a bit lower in the global south, meaning the projects are profitable, the ones that are secured and implemented in, for example, in African countries. So risk itself that associated with the project is actually highly compatible and compatible in the global standard and what's needed for the investors. But what boils down into high cost of financing for projects in global south and then leading to the lack of financing flow going into these regions is actually the macroeconomic and country risk. And I will discuss it more further details, and I first give it to my colleagues to intervene as well. But we need to understand what is the key drivers and to design the intervention and the solution more tailored to that specific information is showing to us. It's not about the project is hard to secure. It's not about the project is not profitable in, for example, in African countries, but it's really about how we are seeing and assessing the country risk and how we should design the intervention to make that risk to be more mitigated.
Talking of risk sharing, risk sharing is a kind of arrangement we've been constantly talking about in public-private partnerships. We've been talking about it for even traditional infrastructure projects. And it has not been an easy nut to crack. We've seen most big projects, including those financed by the multilateral development banks, not just fall by the wayside, but countries actually go into distress on issues related to risk sharing. And so the problem which the global south really faces in these kinds of situations is that in most public-private partnership projects, the solution is to pass the risk onto the private party and minimize the risk to the public party. I mean, that is a common option which is chosen in the global south. Now that clearly is an unworkable option. So what kinds of risk-sharing arrangements can there be? What kinds of financing can there be where there is an equitable burden of risk-sharing? So somewhere, yes, there has to be an infusion of public money. I mean, that is what the whole debate has been. So where are these, innovative methods? If you look at the list of questions you've been given, innovative methods, more effective methods, they're both the same thing. If it is innovative, it is going to be effective. If it is not innovative, it is going to fall by the wayside. So what is so special about green projects that can be amenable to certain kinds of financing, and how does the risk-sharing burden become more equitable between North and South, and between both the private and the public partner? Who would like to crack at that?
Yeah, maybe I can say a point on that. One strategy that we are seeing, I'm advising renewable energy or the financing of renewable energy projects in Europe, but also in neighboring regions such as North Africa. And what we are seeing to bridge the gap between public finance and private is that we really need to build on partnerships, and the key is partnerships between industry off-takers and the energy producers. Because one of the biggest risks is actually the off-take risk. So if you want to build a new energy plant and you sell your electricity to the market, you don't know how much money you're going to get for that. And so the money, maybe the bank then won't fund you. But if you have a big off-taker, like for example in South Africa, the mining industry, or if you look to India, steel industry, and these are areas where there is a lot of growth or there will be a lot of growth in the next years, then you can create partnerships between the off-taker and the producer in various forms. And one thing that has become quite popular in Europe, but I think also all around the world, is power purchase agreements. These are agreements between, for longer term, about 10 years or more, to off-take a certain amount of energy from an energy plant for a certain price. And what that gives you is for the producer the certainty of cash flows. So also for the bank, which in the end really looks after getting their money back, they know how much money this energy generation will raise in the next 10 or 15 years. So they can prove with this agreement how much cash flow they will earn, and they can easily, or easier than before, get a loan for that. Then on the other hand, you have the industry. For them, the profit or the benefit is that they can claim that they are sourcing green energy. Now in some regions, like in Europe, there are regulations that you need to source from green energy, so that ticks off that box. But it also gives you the certainty of price, and especially in terms of energy crisis, where sometimes prices skyrocket for energy, that gives you a planning security as an industrial company. So you have benefits on both sides for such a power purchase agreement, and you can structure it in various ways. You can either have a power plant on-site that sometimes works for solar, or off-site. That is often the case for wind energy. So wind doesn't blow everywhere, so you need to build your wind park somewhere else. You feed in the energy to the grid, and then the industrial gets it from the grid again. But it still works via such an agreement. And another option would be for an industrial to fund an equity stake in energy generation, but it's really about the partnership between the off-taker and the generator, because you have a specific purpose for this energy, and it makes it much easier for the funding.
See, the risk of off-taking being taken by the energy producer may be fine in, say, Europe, where tariffs are more market-based. But in certain countries in the global south, tariffs for certain sections of the population are not market-based. Mm-hmm. There are lots of cross-subsidies which exist within the system, whereby the larger consumers will actually pay more. So the cross-subsidy is not from the government to the off-taker. The cross-subsidy actually comes from the energy producer. So there then comes a resistance to be able to actually honor PPAs. And that is where most countries in the global south struggle. They sign PPAs and fail to honor them.
Yeah, I think that's where states need to come in to guarantee counterparty risk. And I mean, it's in the end cheaper than funding the energy production yourself. You need a guarantee. But I think that's something where states can come in and assist or maybe make the right regulatory framework to enable PPAs. Because as you said, it's not so easy for any companies to conclude such an agreement. There's still risks involved. But I think with the right framework, you can nurture those power purchase agreements.
So Lee, is there some other solution? Because governments that's a primary debate which is taking place, which took place at COP29. Government after government from the developing world said, sorry, this is not something we can do or would like to do. We cannot bear that burden. And that is where the whole debate about how to stimulate climate finance, whether there has to be some amount of burden sharing arrangement which makes it more equitable. Are there mechanisms? Can there be mechanisms?
That's a very interesting question. And I want to start with the issues around the financing gap, and when we're talking about we want more money flows into Global South to make the green transition work and green industrialization work. I think it's the underlying assumption is that the Global South has huge renewable endowment. For example, our recent analysis has done on the solar technical potential for the African continent is there's 7,900 gigawatt of solar PV potential here, just factoring in 1% of land utilization. So itself is a huge, and it's quite big enough to source the Africa's green industrialization. Then there's still the question of the capital. And I want to introduce some of the interesting model that has been seen in African continents as a successful model to basically led by public sector, but also worked well with and interacting with the private sector, which is independent power producer model. So in African continents, if you look at it, 60% of African countries are allowing the private participation in their power generation segmentation through IPP. And in the last 5 to 6 years, we have seen that more than hundreds of utility scale-up solar PV projects have reached through IPP program. And also the 60 and 70% of solar PV projects in the last 3 years in African continents has been made through IPP, same as wind. So this shows that with a clear modality that led by the country, it could definitely improve some of the struggles that countries facing in terms of attracting more capitals. And other modality I want to share with you is the country platform. So if we look at the case of Egypt, for example, Egypt launched the Nexus NUAFIM. I'm missing out the whole what it stands for, but basically it's the country platform where they flagged the country's priority projects on agriculture, power, and water. So how did it work is they interacted through the country platform, what country want to finance as a priority, and they interacted to address the policy and regulatory barriers. For example, they launched the golden license process, which is, in some extent, if you look at the renewable energy projects, there has been cost implication if the project is delayed because of the license and administration documentation process delayed. So this interaction and through the platform, they identified this has occurred 30% of costs driving up. So they wanted to address this, so they developed a one-stop shop process, which is every required license, including environmental assessment, can be go through this golden license platform. And this definitely increased the 20% of FDI the FID achievement, which is final investment decision of the projects that country was struggling with. So there are a couple of measures that led by Global South and has been achieved in addressing some of the issues on attracting more capital into the areas that want to pay attention to.
Dennis, you are an investment company, White Roads Finance. Now, tell me about White Roads Finance. White Roads is about investing in areas where normally investments do not flow. It's precisely about green finance. And yes, your website says that the potential of the Global South, its own renewable energy potential is 400 times that its fossil fuel potential. Between this potential and the promise it holds, there is a huge shadow. What is that shadow, and how do you get over it?
Thank you for this opportunity to be part of this panel and to speak about an issue that touches millions of people's lives. And the energy poverty affects more than just basic conveniences. It limits the education, restricts healthcare, hampers the economic growth, and place families in severe disadvantages. I would like here to share some examples about the innovative financing mechanism that can transform the energy access. First is the blended finance. My colleague explained in details that allow public and private capital to work together. in blended finance, grants or concessional loans from governments or development banks de-risk investments, making it possible for private sector players to enter in the energy sector in region that might overview as a high risk. By creating public-private partnerships, we can unlock a large pool of private capital required for ambitious infrastructure projects like hydropower, solar grid, mini-grids, clean cooking solution. This approach has already yielded success in countries like Kenya, where blended finance helped the country become a global leader in grid solar systems. In addition, I would like to bring the example of the country I come from, Albania. We are a country that produced almost 100% of the energy through clean resources, mainly hydropower. But because of the heavy reliance on this single source, the government, through different ways of blended finance, such as public-private partnership, is exploring a way to diversify the energy production, mainly focusing wind and solar energy production. Another example I would like to share is the result-based financing, which reward private sector entities based on the actual energy services they deliver. For example, rather than providing upfront capital, government or donors set payment structure that only pay out once households have consistent and verifiable access to the energy. Result-based financing not only ensure accountability, but also encourage innovative and efficiency, allowing small and medium enterprises to enter the market and scale faster. In Albania, the government is supporting the families to install and use the solar panel for water heating by household customers, and they subsidize up to 70% of the cost of purchasing and installation of solar panel. Another mechanism is the green bond, which is an innovative tool with immense potential. These bonds offered a way to attract environmental sensitive investors who are interested in supporting green infrastructure projects that drive sustainability energy access. These bonds can be directed towards projects with measurable impact, like off-grid solutions or rural electrification programs. In addition, to promote clean energy, green bonds tap into growing pools of impact-focused capital, bringing gaps in energy financing. It is important that the government aligned incentives by encouraging business to align with the ESG principles. Similar to World Bank bond, India Greens bond, Brazilian Amazon bond, the EU Next Generation initiative uses green bonds to finance climate-focused recovery efforts post-COVID-19. Another mechanism is the microfinance, which is an important tool in the energy sector. Small loans enable families and communities to invest in affordable solar home systems, efficient cooking stoves, or battery storage solutions. These small-scale investments improve daily life while reducing reliance on expensive and polluting fuels. Microfinance institutions and fintech companies are already making energy products more accessible for offering pay-as-you-go models that align with economic reliance on underserved communities. In this context, the role of local financial institutions is crucial as they understand their communities' unique needs and challenges as well. By providing technical and financial support, the local banks, cooperatives, and credit unions, all these institutions can empower the finance small-scale, sustainable green solution and rural areas as well, creating jobs and strength more local economies. And another element I would like to emphasize is the advocate for regional cooperation. For instance, pool funds or regional energy hubs can attract investors interested in large-scale investment across multiple countries. For example, TAP, Transatlantic Pipeline, the gasification projects agreement with the Albanian Electro Energy Corporation, and Masdar, the Abu Dhabi Future Energy Company, for strategic projects in producing renewable energy in Western Balkans. This type of collaboration enabled risk sharing, economies of scale, and resecure optimization, making projects in the low-income areas more viable. We need to prioritize creating cross-border networks that promote collective growth and development.
So in many of these which you mentioned, a lot of the burden for climate finance actually shifts either onto the local government, which is the national government, or social enterprises within the nation, or other enterprises within that whole ecosystem. That is how it is moving forward. Now, when we start talking, and Alex, this question is for you. You advise both borrowers and lenders. You advise on both sides. You are basically a finance consultancy company in green finance. Now, how do you bring the two together in these situations? How do you convince them? How do you make these marriages happen?
Yeah, I would say it's all about the risk, really, to mitigate it as much as possible. Maybe I can draw on the example of green hydrogen, that I think some of you might think it's a thing of the future, but actually you already need to start planning now if you want green hydrogen in 5 years. But that is some of the lessons there are also translatable to the raw materials sector, really. Again, it's about partnerships, about sharing the risk between the producer and the off-taker. And I mean, currently projects that, for example, I looked at in North Africa for green hydrogen, they are not viable yet because there are various risks involved. You have the technical risk about with the big installations of electrolyzers that were not or have not been tried before, so you need to slowly scale it up. You have political risks. You have the offtake risk, and again, the offtake risk is one of the main factors. The biggest electrolyzer project in the world from NEOM in Saudi Arabia is only possible because there is a guaranteed offtake. So what ideally you should achieve is an offtaker. Now, I know there are not many companies that will commit to taking off hydrogen for 10 years, so I think there needs to be government support. And I'm also going to tell you why I think it's in the interest, for example, of Europe to support such a thing. Because Europe is really interested in decarbonization. It has managed, I think, a 37% reduction in CO2 emissions compared to 1990. There's a goal for 55% in 2030, but we know we need to work together with the whole world to make climate action possible. And so that's maybe the overarching goal. But there are also more direct economic interests. Obviously, we have industry in Europe that, for example, in Denmark, leading world manufacturer of wind turbines that want to sell their stuff all over the world. So if the states of Denmark, also the European Union, supports the export of these products to other countries, it's in their direct interest. It's not only giving them away money, so they also profit from it. And regarding hydrogen, I think there are some innovative solutions already on the board. I think they need to be expanded. One example I would like to mention is H2 Global. It's a German platform, and they have a double-sided auction. It's a market-based instrument. So on one side you have a tender where they ask basically all around the world to give bids for hydrogen, and the cheapest ones are selected. And then they're doing the same on the offtake side. So they are asking what industries need hydrogen, what are they willing to bid, and what the price gap is covered by the state. But in the end, it's a market-based instrument, and I think it's quite a smart one that might be an instrument for the future.
So is the solution ultimately offtake agreements with strong take-or-pay arrangements, guaranteed and funded by the global north at viable prices, to make Africa the hub for exporting green hydrogen?
I think that's one solution, but in the end, yeah, it's about partnerships. I think international cooperation here is vital, and it's in the interest of both continents to expand on that cooperation.
We're running out of time. I'll just have one round of questions because my clock is running out. Any questions from the audience? Yeah, there's a hand raised there. Introduce yourself and
Yes,
a short
thank you.
question.
So
Anyone else? Line up. Yeah.
I'm Ornella Tucci, and I have been board member of the Green Climate Fund and the Global Environmental Facilities for some years. And having been part of the government of Albania, I know perfectly well what is going on with the funds, the planet, the global funds. There are almost more than 10 funds all over the world, and they are receiving, let's say, this taxes money from developed countries, working on the projects. And only for the adaptation, they are 8 funds. And some of them, 3 of them, in 2023, they allocated only 1 project for cause of their rules, their bureaucracy, and everything else. So in the case of the ongoing war situation in the world, and by the other hand, the US focused on their own interest, unilaterals. And so can we really expect that COP29 to fix the problems with global climate funds for the global south, for the developing countries? And after all, billions are sitting unused because of complicated rules and delays. How can we trust that these funds will actually reach the countries that need them the most, the global south countries, when political agenda seems to take priority over re-election?
Lee, would you like to tackle that?
Sure. Thank you for the question. Indeed, adaptation has been quite a center of discussion in these days around how we should finance it better. One thing I want to highlight is when we discuss about how we can finance it better, we have to keep in mind that we're dealing with investors and those who are assessing the commercial viability. So far, adaptation has been quite challenging to prove that commercial viability when the assessment stage, because normally climate funds, when they assess the proposal, they go through similar steps as the investors does, which is to see whether not making profitable at the level of commercial, but at least can return some of the investment they are making and to able to create some of the predictable cash flow, as most of the projects are very much crucial when you're assessing the projects. Now for the adaptation, there has been some emerging models, particularly in the clean cooking areas and deforestation, that we have seen some emergence of the models, the result-based models, or we saw some sustainable link-based bonds has been launched in Latin American countries. We also have seen some blue bonds issuance that link to the adaptation projects based on how much carbon mitigation potential they can create. And now in COP29, there have been at least one of the positive news from among many newses, is that the carbon market Article 6 has been agreed in terms of the principle. Of course, it's going to take some time to take off the actual models to be operational, meaning that who will be assessed the projects and integrity of those credits generated. But it is essential landmark agreement because there has been a lot of questions around after CDM era is over, how we can sustain and use the carbon credit market as to finance the adaptation. Because carbon credit is a useful tool to basically structure the adaptation projects. So once the Article 6 is now achieved, which allows a bilateral transaction between the countries, which we saw in the Kilt Foundation back in a couple of years ago, there has been Peru and Switzerland has struck the deal around the Article 6.2 to do the carbon trading, and that gives the cash flow for the Peru to finance their forestation projects. So that kind of deal could be scaled up going forward as Article 6 has achieved some agreement around how they are going to operate going forward. Of course, there are a lot of measures has to be done more beyond this, but step by step, I would say, and then see how it goes. Thank you.
Lee, Dennis, any quick interventions from your side, 30 seconds each on this or something else?
Beyond adaptation?
No, from Dennis and Alex.
No,
from your other panelists.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, overall, I would say there is huge potential in the global south for renewable energy. I think on the African continent, we have 60% of global solar resources, as the International Energy Agency says. There are some strategies to expand that. We've also heard that in most countries, solar is the cheapest energy, so I'm optimistic that we can manage the energy transition together. And as I said before, it's all about partnerships, partnerships, partnerships.
Dennis?
Achieving affordable and reliable energy access in a global south will not happen overnight. But it will happen if we reimagine the finance mechanism, embrace partnerships, and continue to innovate. The mechanism we outlined today demonstrates that we have the potential and there's the responsibility to make the energy accessible to all.
So the good news is, yes, finance is flowing. It is flowing actually by efforts of a lot of countries as well as people and enterprises in the global south. Maybe support for it is not as forthcoming from the north as it should be, and that is a struggle and a battle that will keep on having to be waged and fought at every COP, 29, 30, 40, it'll go on and on. But that really means that, yes, pushing the Paris Agreement goals, kicking the can further down the road, that is what is going to happen. So that is why this battle must go on, but the Global South is very much there in the picture, taking initiatives and doing a lot on its own steam, bearing the burden of climate finance. Thank you very much for being here. A big hand to our panelists.
Thank you so much to the panelists. If I could just invite you to the top of the stage for a quick photograph.